America targeted the oil, shipping and insurance industries and the central bank of Iran. American companies cannot deal with Iran now. And listen to this. Any other country that does business with Iran will also be punished. That's what America says. It will impose similar sanctions against those countries which trade with Iran. This is called total isolation. The idea is to completely cripple Iran, to make sure that its economy collapses, make sure that Tehran loses all its friends. Joining us this evening is Adnan Tabatabai. He's an expert on Iranian affairs. He's with us from Dusseldorf in Germany. Thanks very much, Adnan, for being with us here. My first question to you, are these two countries, the US and Iran, on the brink of war, or is this just posturing?
Well, it is a very dangerous situation. We at least have a lot of risks, or the risks are high that some form of unintended action happens on the ground in the region of the Middle East, particularly in the waters of the Persian Gulf, where you have Iranian and American ships, you have Iranian and American troops in Syria and in Iraq. So there is the risk that there is some sort of a armed conflict that could then easily escalate.
So is non-compliance or partial non-compliance of this deal Iran's best response?
Even in the statement President Rouhani made on Wednesday morning, he emphasized that Iran still feels committed to the agreement and that the agreement is not, that Iran has not withdrawn from it. But it is at the same time clear that Iran is scaling down some of its commitments, but it shows one area in which recent U.S. sanctions have actually made Iranian implementation nearly impossible, and that is the waivers that are no longer in place for Iran to sell excess stockpile of uranium and heavy water, and that is the reaction Iran has shown. And additionally, as you have already mentioned, the 60 days deadline, and measures can follow after that deadline.
How do you see Europe's role here? European countries, including the EU, were signatories to this deal. Have they done anything more than talking? And now they're hoping that India and China will save this deal.
Well, there is actually a simple formula to it. The political incentive is there. Politically, Europe wants to save the deal, but political incentives are not translating into economic incentives of European companies. So there is no meaningful trade, no meaningful transaction happening thanks to U.S. sanctions. So the Europeans can express the hope that the deal can be safeguarded, but while their companies are not becoming active, they look towards India and China, indeed. And that is the point that has to be seen. How will these two great Eastern powers position themselves? And we can also see Iran looking into what India and China will do.
The people of Iran are bearing the brunt of this. The economy is in the doldrums. Inflation is very, very high, as we said, has shot up to 40%. How do they see America's actions? Do they see this as unfair provocation, or do they believe that this is a consequence of their government's brinkmanship?
Well, surprise, surprise, it's actually both. So when you speak to Iranians, there are obviously, to many of them that I speak to, at least they are not happy with how the government handles things. There is a lot of corruption, there is a lot of mismanagement, which is openly and publicly debated and discussed in Iran, even in the state media. But at the same time, they see the U.S. hostilities and the U.S. policies that are basically that have launched an assault on the Iranian economy. And this is a very dire situation for them.
India was hoping for another waiver from the US. That hasn't come, and India's response has been rather evasive on what it plans to do vis-a-vis buying Iranian oil. The strategic relationship is old and very significant. How do you see New Delhi responding to this crisis?
I am unfortunately not qualified enough to speak about the calculations that are now in place in New Delhi and whether it will really be, so to speak, worth it to save the JCPOA or to withstand U.S. pressures. All I can say is that obviously Iran will lean towards Eastern powers such as China, India, Russia. For that, Iran will need these powers for economic survival, basically. Final
question. You mentioned Russia. Do you think it helps Russia when oil prices shoot up, when this crisis continues to simmer? Or will Russia try and play a role like they've done in Syria?
I assume for Russia, there is no way that the Russians would like to see Iran falling apart. So I think that there will be attempts to safeguard this agreement. At the same time, I have to say that the more dependent Iran is from Russian support or of Russian support and of Chinese support, the better for them. So I think these two parties, as signatories to the nuclear agreement, will certainly try and safeguard the agreement, but they will not spend everything they have into it because they know that Iran will rely on them.
Adnan Tabatabai, it was good to talk to you. Thanks very much for joining us and sharing your inputs on this story.